Zwelinzima Vavi and the National Employers Association of South Africa, Neasa, Chief Executive Officer Mr. Gerard Papenfus. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Indeed.
Firstly, in terms of labour and business, to you both, what are the prospects for 2018? I'll start with you, Mr. Gerard.
Well, there's nothing to suggest that the trend that we saw in 2017 will actually change. I mean, you need to bring about structural changes in the market. You can't do the same thing and then expect a different result. There's no indication that there will be more improved business confidence, although the changes with respect to the is a cautious something to be cautiously optimistic about. But can he do something now? That's a different question. You need to bring about fundamental changes in labour relations, labour laws to get more people into the labour market. And although there's an improvement in the world economy, that's not transferred and translated into the South African economy. So one thing is, what do we expect? And the other question is, what is that we're supposed to do to bring about the required change? But unless we do something else, we will have very much the same result, and job losses will continue in the year that comes.
Mr. Vavi?
I'm sure it is the wish of every South African that things start to improve and that all of the arrows that are currently facing down start to face upwards. And it's a terrible circumstance. It's not just about 2017. To us as Labour, this dark cloud have been there since before 1994. And our disappointment is that post-1994, things have not changed to the better and things are getting worse. Unemployment, as you know, is at record levels. Youth unemployment is at record levels. We've gone into deep poverty levels now. 55% of our people are experiencing poverty, and that we've become the most unequal society in the whole world. And then there's still another monkey in our back called corruption, which is getting no better. We wish that all of that could change in 2018, because we know that without all of those things changing, then South Africa will be in even worse situation than it finds itself already. Now, obviously things do not change just because we pray or because we wish. Things change when practical steps are taken to address. Where I agree with Gerald, it may be that in the detail we will not agree, that we need to take some practical steps to address the growth path model we inherited from apartheid, to address the structural nature of our unemployment, and to address the issue of property, that most black people have no property and therefore cannot be meaningful participants in the economy. We need to address their poverty, the low wage, which means that they don't have purchasing power to buy goods and therefore to begin to turn the wheels of the economy. And all of those things require bold, and they need political leadership that is not compromised by dealings with private sector and big business, that is hell-bent on addressing those structural natures of the economic questions. We need to address, for example, as part of property, the issue of land. There's good news coming from the ANC conference about expropriation of land without compensation. We wish that that could be the direction, not in rhetoric, but in practical steps. I was just having a brief conversation just to show you sometimes there's always a gulf between what is being said and what is being done. The ANC government so far have delivered 10 million hectares of land to the landless black people. But the most disturbing statistics is the one that comes from the Department of Agriculture itself, that says of that 10 million hectares distributed, 70 to 80% of it is lying fallow, meaning that it's not being used. And so you have to address the issue of the capacity to to implement and therefore build the capacity of the state to drive developmental agenda. If all of those things was to happen, maybe we will begin to see a knock from the 37.7% unemployment rate, or youth unemployment reached 55.90 last year, second quarter of last year. Those statistics read horror. And I guess that South Africa has become so numb that we used to this baggage we are carrying every day. We don't care anymore. There's no demonstrations in the streets. We just used to all of this, and that's the most worrying part on our side.
Now, you mentioned structural change, the both of you. What details in those structural changes would you like to see?
Well, you see, that's where Mr. Vavi and I differ somewhat, maybe, because everything he's just said, I agree with, almost everything. You know, let's talk about, just before we get to the structural changes, there's a message that needs to go out in South Africa, and that is that the private sector is welcome in South Africa. You cannot threaten them of misappropriate or not, you know, taking away their properties, tell them they're the enemy of the state, and then expect them the next moment that they must employ. And then when they employ, make it as hard as possible for them to even dismiss. You see, and employers don't employ because they want to dismiss. They employ because they need people to work for them. But things happen and people need to employ. And in terms of structural changes, just on employment laws, and there's a lot of things that need to happen in the economy, in terms of structures in the economy. But in terms of employment law, the harder you make for a person to dismiss, the more unlikely it is for him to be employed. It is costly to employ, and you can't have your bread buttered on both sides. If you want a job, take the risk of being dismissed. Stay in the job because of integrity, honesty, and hard work. But if a government interferes to such an extent that they prescribe to you so much, interfere so much in the workplace, that it becomes so little attractive to employ, there won't be employment. So that's one of the structural changes that need to happen. And there's still no better form of remuneration than a job, even a low-pay job. No grant can pay a person that what even a low-pay job can pay a person. Am I suggesting the abuse of workers? Not at all. But we see what's happening in the marketplace. We also need a totally different attitude of the nation in terms of the will to work and to contribute. We cannot change this world only through protest action, but in terms of changes that need to happen, I think everybody needs to protest. Everybody needs to protest. But there's structural, legal changes required. Lots of our sectors are governed by bargaining councils where big unions and big business dominates those councils and enforce their rules on small business and push small business out of the market. There's structural changes needed in that area.
Due to time, I'm going to ask Mr. Vavi just to give your view on that, and then we wrap it up.
That's not structural crisis that the South African
So you
economy
disagree?
is. I completely disagree. Unless somebody can one day say this clause of the LRA won't allow me as an employer to dismiss a worker who consistently comes late to work, or who, despite my efforts to train him, is untrainable, doesn't have skills, he has an attitude, I can't do anything about these things. If somebody doesn't show us the clauses in the LRA that won't allow an employer to act, then sorry, I will not listen to that. Here's the structural crisis facing the South African economy as far as we are concerned. The first one is that the growth path we inherited is a growth path that wholly relies on the mining sector, on the heavy chemicals, that is completely dominated by the financial sector. If we can not change that, we're going nowhere in terms of unemployment, poverty, inequalities in the economy.
Thank you very much. That is General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi, as well as the National Employers Association of South Africa, Neasa, Chief Executive Officer Gerard Papenfus. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Of course, let's cross over to KZN.